Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Motivation Sucks. And I am Joshua Shaffron. And what we're going to do today is pick right back up with some of our preliminary work that we were discussing in terms of getting ready for us to focus in on the 3 episodes next week of how to create your 360-degree breakthrough, so that you can enjoy both material success, whatever that means to you, whether that's like it was for me to become a millionaire, or maybe it's just to have the financial freedom to do what you want to do when you want to do it, but also, and probably more importantly, to be able to have the fulfillment, to be able to make the meaningful contribution at the same time so that you feel fulfilled, so that you feel like you're making a meaningful impact. And that's what we're talking about today. So, and we're going to continue with the preliminary work that's necessary, so to speak, on how to get ready for the particular 3 sessions next week and the 3 individual breakthroughs that we'll be discussing in each of the 3 episodes next week. How to do that specifically and how to experience that in your own life, and so that you can start to make that meaningful difference. I want to make sure that you have the basic prerequisites, so to speak, as to so that you know what to expect, so that we're starting on the same page accordingly. So just a quick piece of housekeeping before we get into today's work, and that is that if you'd like to speak up and join us and join the conversation in the community, please go to speakuphere.com. That's speakuphere.com. You'll see the in the actual URL all in the description there. And also, if you'd like to be notified of the various episodes and the topics and when we're going live and throughout the week, please join us over at motivationsucks.com and check it out and sign up for the alerts accordingly. So, all right, so let's get into it. Now, well, today is all about Fred the flat-headed flea. And rather than me try to tell the story as being a little bit rusty, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a portion of an interview that I did explaining this kind of in depth, so that we have an understanding. Now, Fred, as you're going to discover, is an actual tool for us to be able to determine what we talked about yesterday, the tale of 2 paths, being able to choose one path over the other, where we kind of by default have probably fallen into the collector's path, where we're operating from a place of not enoughness. There's not enough of this. There's lack in our lives, and we want more. And so we're going from that point, as opposed to the other path, which is the builder or the creator path, where we're expanding outwards. And we talked about the key to this is what Carl Jung said, and what you'll see somewhat posted behind me on the whiteboard there, which is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And then we talked about briefly yesterday as well about becoming the objective observer, so that you can see the unconsciousness. And it sounds like it's complicated, but it really isn't all that complicated once you know what to look out for. And Fred is one of those tools, one of those resources. But before you can utilize it in your life and be able to take control back over your life and take control back over the different aspects, and making the intentional shift from one path that's kind of going along the oblivious path, which is the path of motivation, where we're motives for action, where we're looking outside of ourselves and we're saying, I need to take this action, make this behavior because of this. And when we say because of this, that's an indication that in fact, what's going on is that we have a motive that we think is creating the need for us to respond or to react or to behave in a certain way. And so in reality, though, it is outside of ourselves very often. And so, again, Fred is one of those opportunities to use that as a tool, as a resource to be able to dive into it. So with that, I'm going to play an excerpt of this video so that we can be succinct, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss it a bit. All right? See you in a minute. You know, it's funny. We have Fred, the flat-headed flea, to blame for being here today. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but Fred, and you can call him Sir Fred if you like, that's his formal name. He didn't always have a flat head. Let me tell you how he came to have this flat head. He was walking down the street, minding his own business, having a good old time. He had a good life, normal, everyday things, and all of a sudden, fate stepped out of nowhere and grabbed him, plucked him up off the street, and put him into this mason jar with a lid on it. And so Fred, like many of us, most of us, does not like being trapped, does not like being controlled. So feeling stuck, what does he do? He tries to get out, right? So he can't push the jar over. He can't wrestle it down. So a flea can jump, though, and jump really high, really strong. And he was like the best jumper in his class, So he starts jumping. And what does he do? Well, he smacks into the lid. And it hurts, right? But he doesn't care because he's getting out of there. He's determined, and all the things that his coaches told him, and jumping classes, and everything that his dad taught him about. Winners never quit and quitters never win, and all of that conditioning, all of that programming took over. And so what does he do? He jumps even harder, and he bangs his head into the lid of the jar. And of course, that's how he got his flat head. But that's not the whole story. Because what ended up happening is that he continued to, the fact that he flattened his head and hurt himself and he caused himself pain and he conditioned himself and he got that flat head, did that change the fact that he still wanted to get out of the jar? No, he still wanted freedom. That didn't change anything, but he still felt stuck. He still felt trapped in that jar because he was, right? And he had that limitation, the lid on the jar. So what does he do? Well, he teaches himself how to continue to try to get out of the jar, but not feel the pain anymore. So for him, that means he only jumps as high as the lid. He's capable, because he's the best jumper around, of jumping, much higher than where the lid is, but he's jumping, he trained himself, he conditioned himself to only jump just high enough to get to the lid so that he could still feel good about doing something, trying to have a modicum of control over his life, to try to still jumping for freedom because he still wants to get out. So he continues to try, he continues to work at it, works really hard at it, but he's only jumping as high as the lid. Fate steps in again, takes the lid of the jar off. And so Fred goes, oh, this is my chance, right? I'm going to jump right out of here because I'm perfectly capable, right? So he goes, I'm out of here. See you later. I'm out. Unfortunately, no. See, because, again, he's conditioned himself, because of that pain, to believe that the lid's still there. So to him, jumping any higher than the lid is equals pain, because that's what gave him the flat head. So he will continue to jump and jump and jump and jump, being perfectly capable, having no limits on him anymore, being perfectly capable of escape, perfectly capable of getting out of that jar. He stays stuck, unfortunately, in that jar, but it's a limitation that of his own making. It's a jail, if you will, a prison of his own making, because of the fact that he conditioned himself to avoid that pain, and he doesn't challenge it. But now here's an interesting thing that's happened to him, is that the reason he's going to die in there, unless somebody comes along and tips the jar over, or fate steps in and takes him out of there again, or something happens outside of his control, he's going to die in there because he's believes now that his reality is he's trapped. He's accepted that reality. He's accepted that he's now trapped, and he's going to continue to jump because he can't sell out on himself, right? He can't feel like giving up, but he's only jumping as high as that lid once was, and he's burning himself out. He's never going to be able to get out of there unless he does something about that conditioning. Now you say, well, I'm not Fred. You're not Fred. Or are we? Because we all have these flat-headed flea stories, meaning that we conditioned ourselves to believe things that may or may not be true anymore. So based upon the reality of the great unwashed reality of the entire world, right? And that's unknowable to us as a whole, right? We select based on our experiences a small subset of that to, tap into. And then we give our attention to a little itty bitty piece of that we focus on, and that becomes what we condition ourselves to believe is our reality or is true. And what's strange is that Fred didn't know that he conditioned himself, didn't know that this limitation was there, didn't realize that he did it. But it still didn't change the fact that he's limiting himself. And so for him, that is his reality, right? That is what he believes is what's possible, what's impossible. The way it is, the way life is the way that he conditioned himself to believe it. So these Fred stories, as I call them, they get conditioned in us at very early ages, right? And we, just like Fred, we have no idea that they're even going on. They become unconscious. At one point, it was very conscious, but it got conditioned into us. And it happened, and so now we don't even see it anymore, even though it's there. So it becomes part of like a computer operating system, if you will, our base operating system, where it's who we are. It's part of our identity, right? So let me give you an example of one of my early Fred stories. So before we get into an early example of the Fred stories there, I wanted to just give a shout out to Matt. I see you there, brother. It's been a long time, man. And Tom Bell, how are you? Are you healthy? Are you hanging in there? I was saddened to hear about all of the challenges that you're having. So anyway, before we move on, I'm gonna play another portion of the interview where I give a personal example. I just wanted to draw a parallel for you. Well, two things. I wanted to ask everybody, like, what can you relate in any way, shape, or form to the story of Fred the Flat-Headed Flea, and how that may be showing up in your life, and how that conditioning can take hold without us seeing it, yet it becomes a true reality where we have we appear to have that lid on a jar, and we think that we're trapped by the lid on the jar. We think we're stuck in a jar, when in fact we have the ability to A, jump out of the jar to begin with, and B, that to see that there really isn't a lid there anymore, even though maybe there once was one and we got hurt, we got set up there. So I just want to point that out as a way to start thinking about this. The other thing that I want to really underline, so to speak, and put an exclamation point on is the part about Fred jumping in the jar after he conditions himself to only jump as high as the lid once was. Why is that important? Well, because here's the thing. He feels like in the jar that he's got to keep jumping because he can't give up. He's got to keep jumping. He can burn himself out. But like I said on that interview, he's going to die in there unless somebody comes along and pulls him out or tips the jar over, and he can, escape that way. But yet he's going to die by jumping. He's going to die by burning himself out. And why is he jumping? Well, he's motivated to jump because that's become his identity. It's become what he does. And so the motivated action is to jump. He's jumping. But in reality, he hasn't stopped to ask himself, what does he want to accomplish? What is he really trying to do? What's the freedom that he's after? And to take an inventory around him, just take an objective look and say, is there still this limitation that I once thought, or am I jumping up and down, limiting myself, but there's no lid on my jar? And I see Tom, let me just pause here for a second, and said, Tom's back in the States with good insurance, so lots of doctors, but feeling better. And by the way, this is so relevant to my life, I may need to rename myself to Fred. Boy, Tom, if you want to come on sometime and we can chat about this and get into it, I'm happy to do that. I would love to chat with you and see how we can accomplish this. Maybe I can help support you and serve you in some way, shape, or form or another. And I would also love to know, Tom, what is, what stuck out for you? Like, how did that resonate for you? I'm making up a story in my head about what it means and how it is coming together. But I have no idea. Cool. All right, it's a date. Awesome. But I have no idea whether that is true or not. So I would love to know how it's kind of showing up for you, like that. So I think now that we dove down a little deeper, I want to give you an example from my life about a particular Fred story, so that you can see this as a specific example that you can start to dissect this in a way back into your own, applications in your life, so that you can adapt it and adopt it for your particular needs. Maybe it'll be useful to see how it's showing up for me. So hopefully the video will stay queued up where it was, and otherwise I'll just fast forward through it and we'll pick it right back up there from the example. Him, that is his reality, right? That is what he believes is what's possible, what's impossible. The way it is, the way life is the way that he conditioned himself to believe it. So these Fred stories, as I call them, they get conditioned in us at very early ages, right? And we, just like Fred, we have no idea that they're even going on. They've become unconscious. At one point, it was very conscious, but it got conditioned into us, and it happened, and so now we don't even see it anymore, even though it's there. So it becomes part of like a computer operating system, if you will, our base operating system, where it's who we are. It's part of our identity, right? So let me give you an example of one of my early Fred stories. I was either 10 or 11, somewhere around there, and my father was a good dad from a standpoint of being a friend. He was a good friend, but he was a lousy father. He was a lousy provider, and that was part of his whole shtick. And he was supposed to, hang out with me every other weekend and take care of me, and we were supposed to do fun things and, father, dad, son time together. And almost always he would not be present. He would call and cancel either at the very last second or at, prior to, and change the game. And so I always felt constantly let down. But this one time, I was really excited because he was taking me to go for an entire weekend upstate New York. I lived in New York City, and he was taking me, he picked me up at my mom's house and took me to upstate New York, and we were going to have an entire weekend together where we were going to bike ride all over the place and have all this fun time together, just dad and me. So we're driving up there, and he didn't cancel. Surprise, surprise, I wasn't let down. And so we go up there and we start going, and it turns out the real reason behind his need for that trip upstate was that he needed to visit his drug dealer supply house so that he could then turn around and sell to his clients and customers for that month. And that wasn't the crappy part. The crappy part was that he left me for several hours on the side of the road. He didn't want to take me to the supplier's house so that I didn't know where it was, and so that it would, quote unquote, protect me, right? So that I would be protected and I couldn't tell anybody, where it was if I was picked up and questioned. And of course, I told him, Dad, I would never drop a dime on you. I would never tell anybody where this is. So, you wouldn't have to leave me, you wouldn't have to abandon me on the road and leave me there. Like, why did you, leave me there for so long? And he said, well, if you got picked up by a rival gang and they tortured you, then you'd have to tell them where the drugs are and where my supplier is. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's great parenting, because so it's okay to abandon me, but don't you realize that if this gang is going to pick me up and torture me, do they, whether I know where it is or not, they're still going to torture me. So that's great parenting, great way to protect your son. And so one of the core things that had been instilled into me, conditioned into me, was that the people that are supposed to protect you, that are supposed to look out for you, supposed to provide for you, are going to constantly let me down. They're going to constantly abandon me. So it's up to me to, kind of take control back over my life. And so from an early age, the way that this conditioned into me was, I can't trust anybody but myself. And the pursuit of freedom for me, having control, being able to write my own destiny, have some say, not being abandoned on the side of the road, not being left for hours at a time, not being let down at the last possible minute, about honoring your word, being a part, and having those experiences. So to me, my pursuit was money equals freedom, because if I have a lot of money, I can do whatever I want to do. Nobody can tell me. It's all up to me. I can do, that was me, Fred, slapping his head into the jar, was all of the conditioning about being abandoned, all of that stuff. I was conditioned there. I didn't know it, right? But it instilled in me that desire for freedom. And in my head, freedom meant becoming a millionaire, having lots of money, having lots of freedom equaled lots of money. So my entire pursuit, my entire focus from even earlier than 10 or 11, I can remember as far back as 6 being very focused in on money. And it was, again, because of this fear of being abandoned, of being let down. And the stories go back farther with my dad and with that fear of abandonment. It even goes back, believe it or not, to birth, from birth to 2 months old. And it's not logical, but it's there, and it became conditioned into me, and it became my Fred story that became a part of my kind of invisible operating system, if you will, that I didn't know was controlling me, that was limiting my experience or what I believed was possible for me, or how I had it wired in my head and conditioned myself to believe that this Fred story meant that this was the only way that I could have this plus this equals this, has to be. That was my, the only way that it could be. That was the formula, if you will. So there's an example of how that showed up in my life, and I can see that playing out in various aspects of my life all over the place. And so the idea behind it is, it's basically a tool so that you can start to see your thoughts. And that's the first step, right? I forget who said this, but what separates us from, our level of consciousness is that we have the ability to think about our thoughts. In other words, when we think a thought, we're not obligated to think it. We can evaluate it. We can take a pause and we can look at it. We can change our structure about it. And the mere thought of looking at your thoughts is making the unconscious conscious. And so we're going to get into that in depth, in the coming episodes, about how to do that and how to become that objective observer and, make that a go, so to speak. And also at the same time, there's a whole host of things that you can do with this yourself. And so what I would suggest that you do between now and the time that we talk again, and that we start going deeper, if you want to play with this, is that I would, rather than try to catch yourself in the moment, think about a time in the past where you had a behavior that you're less than pleased with yourself about. Like maybe you feel guilty over it. Maybe you feel angry still. Maybe, whatever it is. Think about a thought in your past and think about, replay the tape in your head and see how there's a conversation going on. There's a mental conversation going on with yourself, and see where those Fred stories might be laying inside that that experience, right? It's a lot easier to see your Fred stories in reverse rather than try to see them in the future or in the moment when they're happening. Like, the goal is to be able to prevent, to be able to do what I call R&D Fred, which, it stands for recognizing that you've got Fred stories running the show to some degree somewhere, neutralizing them, and then by neutralizing them, you actually can start to dissolve them, cure them, and get rid of them. Because here's the thing. We think because we ignore a Fred story, like for many years in my life, I don't want to think negative, so I would ignore it. Like, no, cancel. Like I don't want to think any negative thoughts. So if I coached myself back in the day to think about a situation that I'm less than happy with in my life, and to bring that back up again, and to evaluate it and to start to play with it, I would have said, no fucking way am I going to do that, because I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be, I don't want to have that energy anywhere in my experience anymore. And that was a big piece of the way that I lived. And it worked for me for a long time in terms of to stay positive, to stay focused on where I was going, to create the kind of financial success that I wanted to create, and to build the type of businesses and the status, etc., that I was looking to build. And so what I'm getting at now, though, is that what I didn't realize back then is just because I was ignoring it did not mean that the Fred story was either neutralized or dissolved. It was still active in me. I just pretended that it wasn't there, or I just couldn't see it. So I drove it deeper into my unconscious awareness, but it was still there. So it was still having an influence on me, which meant that I would repeat the same pattern again. In other words, the story might appear different on the surface. The names would change, the particular scenarios, the circumstances would look different. But in reality, my reaction, my Fred story would trigger the same kind of anger, the same kind of, I'll cut you, like I'll give it back to you twice as hard, or whatever it may be that triggered it, or feelings of shame, of guilt, of, fear. And, but they were still in me, right? So it was still operating below the surface, only I couldn't recognize it because I was ignoring it, right? But by just acknowledging Fred and letting Fred be Fred and letting the story be the story and just observing it and going, isn't that interesting? Just allow it to be what it is without it defining me, without it having any emotional connection to it. That in and of itself, you will find, at least it did for me, play with it, but in and of it for me, what ends up happening is that it allows the energy to come up and out and go. And now I'm truly dissolving it. I'm releasing it altogether rather than reliving it. I am letting go of it. I am, letting it go truly by allowing it to be there so that you can actually heal from it. And that's really the three-part formula for recognizing it, neutralizing it, and dissolving it. And really, neutralizing and dissolving can happen all at the same time. Actually, all three can happen like this all at the same time. But that's really the three-step process that's going on. Is you recognize what's happening, that, oh, wait a minute, I have a choice. That was a Fred story. I can observe the Fred story. I can just see that was what was going on. I can play that conversation back in my head. Why does this always happen to me? Fred smacking into the jar, in the lid, right? And I can start to see them. As soon as I see them for what they are, that it's actually a story that I've conditioned into myself, that I've been telling myself again and again and again, I can choose something different. So this really comes into effect in so many areas of our lives, but specifically, and more importantly, as far as I'm concerned, where it shows up is, like, for me, my goal, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, my number one value and vision for my life is and was and still is freedom. But in my earlier days, somehow around the age of 4 or 5 years old, I equated freedom with becoming a millionaire. So I couldn't be free until I was a millionaire. And so that's what drove me. Now, what ended up happening is that eventually I became a millionaire. Now, it wasn't until I was 32 years old that I became a millionaire for the first time. Notice I said the first time, right? Because I made and lost millions over the next 10 years, multiple times, many times. And each time I didn't realize it then, but what was going on was there was a Fred story that was sabotaging me, that was bringing me back down. But here's the thing. So I became a millionaire for the first time at 32 years old. Now, it didn't mean that I wasn't pursuing it. Literally from the age of 5, I was pursuing my dream of becoming a millionaire. And I would sell candy on the streets, and I would do all sorts of crazy things. And some of them worked, some of them didn't work, but that was in me at a very early age and drove me. And I allowed that to motivate me, was the drive, because I wanted to really, I didn't know it then, but the reason why I wanted freedom was that I felt like my life was controlled. I felt like I was limited. I felt like I didn't have enough. And if I just had the millions that I wanted, then I could do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, and I could be free. And I would have that freedom once I did that. What I didn't know is that when I became a millionaire for the first time, and I started making a lot of money, and it happened rather rapidly, because from the time that I really started focusing in on this stuff, it was about 18 months from the day that I was scrambling to make my bills to the day that I was 18 months later, I was making an income of over $20,000 a week in personal net income at that point in time in my life. And in short order, I was a cash millionaire. I was a centimillionaire, meaning that I had earnings of $1 million a year, not just a net worth of $1 million a year. So I'm excited, right? I reached my freedom point. I'm free. I got all this stuff. And what I discovered that I didn't want to admit to myself was that I still felt the same fear. I still felt the same anger. I still felt the same concerns, the same pullbacks, the same emptiness inside. And I realized that not till 10 years later, actually, because between the ages of 32 and 42, like I said, I made and lost millions multiple times. But finally, at the age of about 42 years old, in 2009, 42 years old, in 2009, I had to face facts that money wasn't the answer. The millions wasn't the answers. And I was not happy with the work that I was doing, with the contribution that I was making in the world, with the impact, with I felt like I was supposed to be more than my life had become. Now, on the surface, you know what? I mean, like, to an outsider looking in, I looked like I had it made, but I was still had the same feelings. And I come to find out that looking back on it over the next 10 years after I shut down all of my business operations and started to focus in on like the journey of finding that inspiration and operating from an inspired action set point rather than a motivated action set point, and take control back over my life in terms of deliberately choosing, shifting from that collector's path to the creator's path, the builder's path, the bold molders, to create an unprecedented bigger future. And to me, that meant, in addition to having the financial security and the financial success, it meant making a meaningful contribution in the world and having meaningful momentum and doing things that fulfilled me, in addition to having success with it. And that's where the 360-degree success solution, or the 360-degree breakthrough, was born from, out of that experience. And so it's about being balanced. It's about having the control and the ability to have the three areas of our life, the three primary areas of our life. That we have the professional life, where we have our finances and our income, and whether that's being an entrepreneur, or whether it's being running a practice, or being a healer. However that looks for you, it's how you make your way in the world. It's how you pay your bills, that type of thing. So we have the professional leadership side of us. Then we've got the personal leadership side of us. This is like and this is where I was really weak in a lot of respects. How do we run our lives? How do we lead our lives on a personal basis to be able to make the contributions in our family lives and have the relationships, the love, the type of support, the connection with our kids, and being there for them, being a part of their life, those types of things in the personal life, in addition to having a supportive environment where you're supportive and loving towards your spouse or significant other, and they're supportive and empowering to you, and where you're feeding off of each other in a powerful way that expands outward, rather than nitpicking at each other and beating each other down and always having it coming in on you. So that's, of course, the personal leadership side of it. And then there's the spiritual side of it, the prosperity consciousness side of it. And I talk about prosperity consciousness from a standpoint of, even though for me, for many years, prosperity consciousness was all about the material success, I realized that actually the money wasn't the driver for me. The money that was just a bonus on top. What drove me was to make the contributions, to share, to give back, and to be innovative, to come up with, work things out, and to share that, and to grow beyond that. And so prosperity to me was represented both the abundance side of it, being open and not coming from not enoughness, coming from abundance, coming from sharing, coming from growing outward, expanding, from a relationship, from all the other areas of your life, not just the money side of it. Although money is still a big, important angle in terms of, if you don't have enough, or you don't feel like you have enough, then it's important, right? But the instant that you feel like you're covered and you've got your stuff, then it's no longer the driving force necessarily. And I would venture to say that it's probably not the driving force in anyone's life. But maybe I'm wrong. So work through that and tell me what you think about that. Tell me what your thoughts are on that type of stuff. So. Some food for thought. And so when I talk about motivation sucks, what I'm really talking about is Fred sucks. But you don't have to be mad at Fred, because Fred has the ability to just point you in the right direction so that you can. Thanks, Troy. Really appreciate it. Live event marketers, yes. And guys, if you're watching this, shout out to Live Event Marketers. Awesome group. It curates some of the best live events and workshops going around the entire internet. And Troy is one hell of a guy, and I highly recommend checking out his group there, Live Event Marketers. And thank you very much for streaming it in there. And we got to get hooked up so that I can save you the trouble, brother. And I'm going to be going live. My goal is to be going live 5 days a week on the Motivation Sucks show with 3 different episodes in a workshop fashion that are going to be serial in nature and build on top of each other. And then I'm going to have one interview type show and one Q&A, in the trenches, making stuff happen with people, and, kind of like just working with whatever comes up, and where that all kind of shakes out. Right now, I'm not at that point where I've got all 5 going yet, but I think I'll be there pretty quickly. So anyway, Troy, that's just a shout out to you, that we can start to execute if you have the bandwidth now to be able to put the switchboard stuff in place and do the share screen, the share stream stuff, so that I can save you the activity, and we can make it happen, Captain. So where was I? Oh, so you don't have to be afraid of Fred and his stories, because really, even though Fred sucks and motivation sucks, what's going on is that it's pointing you in the right direction. It's pointing you towards where to look to be able to observe your unconsciousness. Every time you start to acknowledge Fred, you are recognizing that it is a Fred story. And that moment that you are recognizing it, you are in fact making the unconscious conscious. So bring it full circle back to the quote behind me with by Carl Jung, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And so that's really what we're talking about here with the whole gamut here. Is the first step is to become aware of your Fred stories. And if you've become aware of them in the past, that's great, because in the past, you can start to recognize that they are there. And I got news for you. If you are indeed them in your memory, in your mind, you're actually R&Ding them right now in the present moment as well, and into the future. Because let's face it, the future doesn't exist and the past only exists in our memory, right? So if we're going into our memory about a past behavior, and then we're projecting that same thought or fear or idea or passion or excitement or whatever it happens to be into the future, it's still based on right now. We're taking a memory that doesn't exist anymore except as a memory, and we're then putting it into the future. And if we feel apprehensive about the future, if we feel anxiety about the future, then what we're projecting into that future is a Fred story that was limiting us, that we're fearful is going to happen again. And in fact, that projection, that fear into the future, that anxiety is the very thing that is going to replay the Fred story, so that the future will be more of the same stuff that it was right now. So again, to give you something, a specific assignment or how, is to think about a time where you had a very big reaction emotionally. And now, by the way, this could be positive or negative, but I'm going to use it's easier to get in touch with the Fred stories from a limitation standpoint, when you were pissed, when you were feeling, maybe apathetic towards something. Maybe I battled depression. I have unknowingly my whole life. But And I think a lot of entrepreneurs deal with depression, deal with isolation, deal with loneliness. Only we don't talk about it, right? We we brush it away because if we're this big bad entrepreneur, super mega successful person, we're supposed to have it all together. We're supposed to, don't show weakness, don't apologize for anything. I got it all down, and you can't show any kind of vulnerability whatsoever. That's at least the way that I had it for many years of my life. And so when you start to really recognize this stuff in your memory, and that's why I recommend going for a specific negative memory that is less than, exciting. And because most of us, if we get stuck in this trap, like for me with building businesses and marketing campaigns, it was like, okay, yeah, like I couldn't stop and smell the roses when I had a hit because I was fearful of when it was all going to come collapsing, or how long a particular marketing model or business model was going to work before it stopped working. So I always had to be one step ahead, and I couldn't ever take my foot off the gas pedal. And because the instant that I did, I didn't realize it at the time, but the instant that I did, it snapped back. It all broke out on me, and bam, it was back to ground zero again. So I was actually projecting that into the future. Anyway, getting back to the specific examples of what you can do is that if you look at something that you have a strong emotional fear of, or just a reaction that's less than sunshine and lollipops. We all know when we're feeling excited, abundant, and things are in flow, and we got, it's clicking, and you can do no wrong. That's great. And there's plenty to be gained by evaluating what created that in terms of the stories that you were telling yourself and how you created that. But that's not what's limiting you right now. And what I'm getting at is, and we're going to start I have to lay some foundation before we can really get into the good stuff in a couple of weeks. But what I alluded to earlier is that the Fred stories are still there. Matter of fact, it's not just one Fred story. They stack up, and we may not be consciously aware of them. In fact, a Fred story by definition is unconscious conditioning that's happened over time so that we don't see it anymore. It's invisible to us, and it just runs us. So we think it's nothing going on. We think that, everything's normal, when in fact, it's still running in the background. And all of these Fred stories can stack up, and they're still there. They're still limiting us, and there's a whole host of them. And if you start with just one, and whatever it is, don't start with something maybe that's too big, because maybe that would be too scary. But start with something like, if there's something that your spouse or your significant other says to you that immediately sets you off, and that that if they say X to you, you can be damn sure that what's going to happen is that you're going to strike back, and you're going to you're going to lash out at them, and then you're going to say, oh, like why did that happen? Like if somebody else said that to me, I know, for example, like the parents and mentors in my life, from an early age, they can say something to me and I immediately become defensive. I immediately become, on guard about it. And somebody else can say the exact same thing, just differently, but I could hear it from them and it doesn't set me off. I have patience when it comes from them. So I'm talking about those types of things where it gets an automatic reaction and it's emotional, and you think that you don't have a choice in the matter. Like you feel a certain way, and boom, it is. That's something to look at and to see if in fact what you were thinking, how you were doing it, and just observe it. Allow the situation to be what the situation is. So if you had, if you got an employee situation and you can't build a team and you're really frustrated because, you got to do all the work, which is something that's common with us solopreneurs and even, small business owners. We feel like we got to do it all ourselves because nobody can do it as good as we can. Well, let's face it, that is a way that we end up holding other people small, but also keeping ourselves in that frustration unknowingly, but we're doing it. So if you can just observe it and say the situation is the situation and not have it mean anything to you, just acknowledge it, let it be here, let it be present, and see if you can look at it. Whether you're maybe auditory or visual like I am, or kinesthetic, whatever your primary mode is, feel it, hear it, see it, but look at it from a standpoint, hear it from a standpoint, feel it from a standpoint of you're not having it mean anything to you personally. Does that make sense? So, and I think what you'll find is that you immediately feel lighter. And in that moment, 3 things have happened. You've recognized it, you've actually neutralized it. If you feel lighter, you feel a visceral release, and you, in that moment, that is dissolving it. So you're R&Ding it all in one fell swoop. It might take as long as a minute. If you're truly just letting it be there, if you're truly just acknowledging it, not fighting with it. The reason why any emotion stays present in our experience, we hear these cliches, what we resist persists. Well, what I didn't realize is that the resistance that persists is resistance to, in other words, fighting with the Fred story, the feelings, the reactions that we're having about a particular situation. That's what we're resisting. We're fighting with Fred. We're fighting with those stories. We're resisting the feelings that we believe the situation, the circumstance, what is made me feel this way, caused me to feel this way. And I don't like feeling this way, so I'm going to fight with it. I'm going to push back on it. That pushing back on it is the very thing that's going to reinforce the Fred stories. It's going to keep them sticking around. It's going to make them grow even stronger at this point. And so, thanks, Max. I really appreciate it, brother. And if you want to share what Max just wrote in, your words are always on time and on point. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. What was on time and on point? What sunk up for you, man? And so what ends up happening is that if you can acknowledge the story, acknowledge how you reacted in that moment, go into your memory, play the tape back in your mind, play the tape back auditorily or feeling, however you have to do it to be in that experience again in your mind. But this time, don't argue with how you were feeling. Don't argue with how you reacted. Don't argue with the situation. Don't argue with how somebody else that may have wronged you in that situation behaved. And if they just behaved differently, I'd feel better or whatever, Just let it be, whatever the situation is, allow it to be present, acknowledge it. And you will see that whether it's about you and your behavior, whether it's about your thoughts, whether it's about somebody else's behavior in that specific circumstance, in that specific situation, you will find that even if somebody else reacted in a certain way, the reason you feel a certain way about how they behaved in that circumstance is because of your reaction to their behavior. It's how, it's another Fred story on top of a Fred story. It's like blowing bubbles on top of bubbles on top of bubbles, right? So I would urge you to play with this and don't get too serious about it. Maybe just give yourself, a break and try it small. Because what you'll find is that every time, you don't have to lift the anchor all the way into the boat. Yesterday when we spoke, Max asked, how do you become the objective observer? And that's what we're going to be, that's what we're discussing today. That's basically what we're discussing the whole time is so that we can take control back over our life and we can deliberately create the prosperity, the abundance, because that's our birthright, so that we can tap into that power and know that we have the ability, regardless of what the situation is, regardless of how somebody else is behaving in the situation, that we have that power, that ability, and to be able to change. So I lost my course of thought. As I had something profound. At least I thought I did, which is a good excuse to take a drink of water. So we have the ability. Max asked yesterday, how do we become the objective observer? Well, by practicing. And what I was getting at is that you don't have to. I think it was Lee Bowers, who, when I was in Strategic Coach, Lee Bowers was my primary coach. And he said something to me. I don't know if he invented this or if he got it someplace else and paraphrased it. But he said, hey, guys, you don't have to lift the anchor all the way into the boat. In other words, if you just lift the anchor an inch off the bottom of the seafloor, then the tide can start to turn and the boat can start to turn and your ship can start to turn because there's no longer the anchoring. And in that moment, when that shift occurs, so do your results, so do your outcomes shift as well. And so up to that point, I used to feel like I had to lift the entire anchor into the boat. So how this relates here is that, like I have to know how to do this perfectly. I have to know how to R&D Fred, and I have to R&D all of Fred's stories all at once and become that objective observer. And I need that magic cure all. I need to figure this out. And then I can go on about living my prosperous, happy, fulfilled life. When in fact, a little bit of discipline, a tiny discipline shared and will open up the gateway to more. And every little discipline affects every other discipline of your life. So by just practicing it in a small, little, unseemingly insignificant situation in your life, maybe it's like your spouse or significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. That example of what we talked about earlier, where they can trigger a particular reaction in you. And in the grand scheme of things, no big whoop, right? But if you start there and you can acknowledge that, you will find that it immediately carries over and extends, and you can start to see it. And what's going to happen is that as soon as you start to make the unconscious conscious, in other words, start to examine the situation for the situation and seeing that your reactions to that situation, your feelings in that moment about that circumstance, about what's going on, is in fact because of a Fred story that is making the unconscious conscious. And here's the kind of exciting and fun part, is that you're going to see this everywhere. You're going to see it in yourself. You're going to be able to hear your own conversations, see your own situations, see this playing out in your life. And probably even before that, you're going to be able to see it quickly in other people, because it's a lot easier to recognize this when you're looking outside yourself at somebody else. But it's not going to do you any good until you can observe it in yourself. But, and that may be an easier way to chunk this down on the how side, is to just observe if somebody else has a really strong behavior or strong feeling, emotion, whatever, outburst. Try to observe what's going on without you having a dog in the race, without you having to take sides. You can be objective and just let that person's reaction be whatever it is. It's easier to see that in somebody else than when you're emotionally attached with it, until you get the hang of this. But the point that I'm getting or driving to here is that in short order, because every little discipline affects every other discipline, and how you show up in one area of your life is how you show up in all areas of your life. So if you have a Fred story that's running you in a seemingly insignificant area of your life, I promise you that same Fred story is influencing your financial success, your personal leadership, your professional leadership, as well as that prosperity, uncertainty, or certainty and that aspect of your life. I promise you it's showing up there too, because how you play at one thing, how you behave in one situation is how you show up in all the situations of your life. And the good news about that is that as soon as you can recognize that and not have it be judgmental by yourself, criticism by yourself, forget about what everybody else has to say, what the rest of the world has to say about it. But as soon as you can give yourself a break and just allow it to be there, to examine it without judging yourself, without criticizing yourself, the tiniest little glimmer opens up the floodgates for you. And you can create that upward spiral of the better it gets, the better it gets, the better it gets. And I don't expect y'all to just take me at my word on this. This came from me after probably 15 years of deep work on this stuff, where I fought it tooth and nail and I didn't buy it, and I had to play with it and experiment with it. Now, I'm not suggesting and saying by any stretch of the imagination that you have to be as stubborn and pig-headed as I was to keep beating yourself against, your head against that brick wall, because you just are thick-headed. I would suggest that you play with this now, but experiment with it and see if it works for you or doesn't, and then report back. And if you don't believe that it's working for you, or you feel like something is amiss, then let's chew on it. Let's bring it up. Let's see what we can do about expanding on the thought, on the idea, and in that moment we can have a breakthrough for all of us, and we can take thought. We can expand our awareness of how all of this stuff works, and we all end up winning. So that's my goal with this Motivation Sucks show and podcast. So just as a little reminder, as we're wrapping up here, go over to motivationsucks.com, subscribe to the email list so I can keep you abreast of the weekly sessions, what's serialized in terms of what the topics are going to be, when they're going to be happening at the various times, particularly now in these early stages where we've got haphazard. I plan on falling into, within the next 30 days or so, into a regular systematic pattern with it. But right now it's a little helter-skelter. And then also, if you sign up on the email list, then you can keep in tune, but you can also become part of the community and engage with me via email, so that we can start to expand this out and cover show topics, so that I make sure that I'm custom molding this to you. The other thing that I would highly recommend that you do, if you wouldn't mind, is if this has become meaningful to you, if you're enjoying this so far, it's going to get better and better and better. We're going to get more and more fine-tuned, and once we get some of this foundational stuff out of the way, so that we can really start to explore some of these deeper topics, but in a small, thin sliced way, what we can do is, if you wouldn't mind, go over to the brand new YouTube channel that I just started. It's probably only got 1 or 2 subscribers, if that now. And it's brand new. We're just getting it going. It's the Motivation Sucks YouTube channel, but that's where the home of this, the video side of this, is going to live at any rate. Obviously, motivationsucks.com is going to be the main website and the community there. But what we're moving towards is the YouTube channel, with the ability that YouTube gives us for the chat and for the community building there is really, really powerful. So that's where this is going to live. And if you just go to speakuphere.com, it will redirect you. Thanks, man. See you soon, brother. And it will redirect you to the YouTube channel, so that you can get in tune and supported, and anything that you can do to both help in terms of getting the word out about the show would be greatly appreciated, as well as, and more importantly, frankly, is to make sure that we're molding this and, to your needs, to what works in your particular life and situation. So if you will practice the hows and give it a try and report back. And don't worry about what the results are. The results don't matter. Just worry about doing it for now. Make it a process-oriented goal, not an outcome-oriented goal. You don't have to become super proficient at all of this tomorrow. Just attempt it and let me know what happens. Engage with the stuff and see where it leads you. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised with where it goes. All right, so remember, next week we're going to be talking about the overarching big idea for next week is how to achieve the 360-degree breakthrough, that prosperity breakthrough in the 360-degree, in other words, all areas of your life, not just financially, not just in your career or practice or vocation, not just personally, not just being really spiritually oriented and connected in there, but all of it, to be happy, fulfilled, material, successful, have all the toys that you want, and also be able to give back, to make the contributions that you want, to do those things, and to know that you're making the impact that you were put here to make, that you know you're making that meaningful difference. That's the overarching big idea for next week. And we're going to be talking about the 3 different barriers, which are actually the stepping stone in each of the 3 episodes, to help you go from where you might be right now to where it is that you want to be, which is the 360-degree success that we're talking about, the 360-degree breakthrough. And so there's 3 barriers in the way. And so each of the 3 episodes next week are going to talk about one of those barriers and the particular breakthroughs that we can apply to overcome it. And so that's where we're heading next week. Tomorrow, we're going to continue on with some more foundational stuff so that next week we can really roll up our sleeves and make some magic happen together. And it looks like Tom's going to be able to... in between some of his doctor's appointments, we're going to be able to do our first, engagement back and forth and just kind of chew on this stuff with Tom. So that'll probably be either Wednesday or Thursday next week, depending on his schedule and the way that the 3 episodes play out for the bigger topic stuff. All right, man, and women. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you really, really soon, as in like tomorrow soon.